Okay, so welcome and thank you, Dr. Dan Isbell, for agreeing to talk to us about the article that you co-authored with your colleagues Lowen and Sporn in 2020 on the effectiveness of app-based language instruction. I just wondering, could you briefly tell us what the study is about?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me. So this study is basically about how effective is an app called Babbel when it comes to learning Spanish. So what we did is we had 54 people who are English speakers. They were mostly students at a university who were not taking regular Spanish classes. We had them use this app for 12 weeks, and we were interested in seeing how much their speaking, vocabulary, and grammar improved after this 12-week study period.
Okay, cool. And can you tell us a bit about the key takeaways of your study?
Yeah, so the good news is that they did improve their Spanish abilities on average.
Okay.
They tended to improve their knowledge of Spanish vocabulary and grammar a bit more than their speaking, but they were able to improve their speaking ability. And that finding is kind of important because that's one question a lot of people have about these language learning apps. If you're just sort of doing things on your phone and not having conversations with other people, will you be able to actually improve your speaking ability? And at least at these lower proficiency levels that we started or that we looked at in this study, more beginners, it does look like these apps can help you improve your speaking ability somewhat.
I see. And if I remember correctly, that was not the students' perception, right? They didn't think their speaking ability improved generally.
Yeah. So in addition to the test scores, we also interviewed the students and sent them questionnaires throughout their study time. And of course, now some students didn't improve their speaking ability, but many did. And so on average, we say that the whole group, they improved. But yeah, even some of the people who actually improved their Spanish speaking ability, they didn't feel like they were getting better at speaking Spanish.
Hmm.
Um, and we're not quite sure why, maybe just because until they took the speaking test again, they didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to really push themselves to speak Spanish more. But nonetheless, they appeared to improve their speaking abilities.
Oh, that makes sense. And how do you think the app, and maybe this is a bit outside of the scope of the article, but how do you think the app could have helped these students improve their oral or their speaking proficiency?
Well, the app does include a little bit of speaking practice. There are some sort of like read aloud type of exercises. And so it maybe, helped just a little bit of practice in that sense, developing a little fluency, just speaking at, but in small chunks. And I think the other piece is, they are learning, or they did learn vocabulary and grammar. So they had more language they could draw on when they wanted to express themselves. When we talk about speaking proficiency, especially at the lower levels, we're talking about pretty modest improvements to their speaking ability. So going from sort of being able to maybe speak a word or two in Spanish, a basic greeting, to then by the end of the study being able to express simple desires or preferences or describe things at kind of the sentence or phrasal level. So it's an improvement, but it's they're not going from 0 to 100 in 12 weeks. But they learned enough language, again, to sort of that they could draw on to express themselves in Spanish, even though it was still difficult to go much beyond a phrase or a sentence for many of the learners.
Okay, I see. Cool. And um, in the study, you also talk about how it makes sense that these apps increase explicit knowledge of the language instead of, or not only, or a proficiency, which was the surprise. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? How these apps can help learners with explicit knowledge?
Yeah, so by explicit knowledge, we mean um, bits of language, vocabulary, new words, grammar forms, grammar rules that you are deliberately learning, that you are consciously knowledge of. Like you can describe in Spanish, for example, how to make your adjectives agree with your nouns, doing that gender agreement, getting el and la and all of that stuff right, or for articles, things like that. So that we tend to think that apps are quite good at that because you do a lot of short exercises that focus on those smaller grammar points or on individual vocabulary words. So, identifying a word by its picture, sort of matching activities. And this app, Babbel, as do many others, provides some explanation of these rules. They use translation to introduce vocabulary. So, with Spanish, the app will tell you that perro is dog, right? So you get that explicit, very clear knowledge. And so that's why we tend to think apps are good at that, because they kind of have a lot of small practice activities or drills that focus on these little bits of language.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And just a few more questions. What did you find in the study? What other factors or things seem to explain the students' learning besides the app? Was there anything?
Yeah. So, using the app, they all use the app, but they varied in how much time they actually spent on the app. So, as we would hope to see, we saw a relationship between the amount of time. So across these 12 weeks, the average person spent about, I think, 11 and a half or 12 hours. So about an hour a week. Some of our more studious participants spent over double or almost triple that amount of time, 30 something hours, and they tended to do better. So it's not just keeping up with it for a long time, but also the amount of practice and study you put in. The other thing, and this one was really interesting, is we had asked students about how motivated they were to learn Spanish. How interested were they? We might have had some participants who were kind of interested in Spanish, so they decided to join the study. Others were really excited about learning Spanish, and that seemed to have an effect on how much they were able to improve their speaking ability. And we don't quite understand how that works, but maybe it affected their behavior. Maybe the people who were more motivated, they did more speaking practice in the app, or maybe they were just sort of practicing things out loud. Who knows? But there was an interesting relationship there, that motivation seemed to matter for developing their speaking abilities.
Interesting. Thank you. And my last question would be, what are some important implications for language learners and teachers who are thinking about maybe the use of Babbel or other apps?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things to consider. First is that, again, at least at mostly the lower range of proficiency, it does look like these apps can help develop some speaking ability. So that's something, again, people have been very skeptical about this in the past. Can I actually learn to speak just by using an app? And I think we can say, well, yeah, you can at least improve your basic speaking abilities a little bit, which is good, because the more you can speak, the more you can do with the language, the more you can get out there and start using the language for authentic communication. I think another implication, this is something that came up in talking to the participants and looking at some of their background information. Many people in the United States, they take Spanish in high school, or they take 1 year of Spanish in college and then they quit. But an app like this might be a way of sort of reclaiming or reactivating and building on some of that previous classroom experience. So it could be helpful for people who are looking to get back into more serious language study after a gap. An app like this could really help refresh and kind of reactivate some of what you had learned before, and maybe push you a little bit further than you had ever gotten in sort of preparation for more intensive language study or use.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Thank you. And one last thing, have you ever used any of these apps for language learning?
Yeah, I played around a bit with Babbel to get myself familiar with the app. I can't say I put in as much work as our participants in the study, so my Spanish is still quite minimal. And in other apps, you know, this is sort of an area of research interest for me. I've tried using Duolingo before to learn some Turkish, and that was an
Mm.
interesting experience. And I've, you know, kind of dabbled with other apps as well. My second language, the one that I focus on most, is Korean. And a lot of these language apps don't offer as much support for East Asian languages. So that's where I'm hoping to see further development going forward. Maybe then I'll be a
Hopefully.
regular user.
I hope so. Well, thanks a lot for such an interesting and informative talk, and we hope to have you in Multiolelo sometime soon.
Great. Thanks again for having me.